to Bones, Ballistics and Boffins, and I'm not going to ask who's the boffin. We're going to talk to you today about the whys and wherefores of forensic science, and the major difference between the screen and fiction and real life. And I'd like to welcome my panellists. So I'm going to introduce our panellists and give you a little bit of a rundown on what they do, and then I'm going to, as I introduce them, I'm going to ask their favourite crime book and their favourite crime TV show and what they can't watch. So I'll start with, I've got Shelley here at my side. Dr. Shelley Robertson has practiced as a forensic pathologist for more than 25 years. She's also studied fatal aviation accident investigation and is a member of the RAAF Special Reserve with the rank of squadron leader, and is a fellow with the overachievers, Shelley, and is a fellow of the Australasian College of Aerospace Medicine. I don't even know what that means, so that's so, I'm very impressed. And she's currently an honorary senior fellow in the Department of Pathology at the University of Melbourne, and runs Forenzia, a forensic and aviation pathology consulting business providing expert opinions in matters of unnatural death, homicide and aviation accidents. And she has a number of true crime stories published in Australian true crime anthologies. So welcome, Shelley. And Shelley... Okay, favourite crime author?
A couple, but I like Elizabeth George, Val McDermott, and
Yeah, just be on the pattern line in this audience, would you? Okay, so favourite TV crime show?
on Midsummer.
You and my mum could be best friends. But I'm just wondering when Midsummer is going to run out of people. Aren't they in like season 20? Did they have that many?
There's probably no problem. My husband and I actually place a bet at the beginning of each show how many people are going to die.
Unlike, when you drive into town and see the population sign, it just has to be a guy standing there with paint, wouldn't it? Okay, now, and this is an important one, I think, for professionals. What can't you watch?
I can't watch CSI, and I have a lot of trouble watching Silent Witness. I watch it, but it's sort of punishing myself.
Okay, see, I'm a teacher by trade as well as a writer, and I found some of my time really funny, but clearly if you're in the crime business, crime shows don't work. Okay, now next we have, I'll do this in seating order. Next we have Liz Porter. Liz is the author of 2 books on forensics, written on the Skin, an Australian forensic case book, which was the joint winner of the 2007 Ned Kelly Award for Best True Crime Book, and Cold Case Files, Past Crime Solved by New Forensic Science, winner of the Sisters in Crime 2012 Davitt Award for Best True Crime, and has written 1 novel, Unnatural Order, soon to be reissued as an e-book. And is working on another. A former award-winning legal affairs reporter. Does that mean legal affairs like, romantic affairs?
No, it means like courts and
just checking.
serious discussions, not going against lawyers.
Okay, so with the Sunday Age, and is now a freelance journalist. This is the bit that I'm most impressed with, as your professionals are. A year-round swimmer at the Middle Brighton Barns, even in this weather.
Yes, I went this morning. Okay.
Oh wow, okay. And do you how about in this weather and just check your extremities to make sure
I run straight into the steam room.
Oh, nice.
Where I sit and look out at the sea, and I probably shouldn't be talking about this because you'll all want to come down there.
No. No one has answered on behalf of everyone. Yes, that's
absolutely delightful.
It's actually not a secret, everyone knows about it, they just don't want to go. Okay, and he's a chorister and a tragically devoted fan of the St Kilda Football Club.
I do. This is actually the local area
Ballarat is it's in the St zone, I think, still.
Okay, I went to the football once. Okay, so Liz, favourite crime author?
I'm sad to say it's either Henning Mankell or Michael Robotham, which I feel embarrassed because they're both men.
I don't think you should be embarrassed because they're men, because men do it better, because I'm in the debate. And we will be arguing that men do it way better than women. So, sarcasm.
We know that's not true.
Yeah. Yes, dripping with sarcasm. But anyway, but for the purposes of the debate, that's fantastic. Favourite TV crime show?
Well, I do. My latest one was The New Detectives, actually, which is not really on TV. It's you know, I just watched it on my laptop. But I also actually like Silent Witness. But because I quite like. I know it's unrealistic, but they do kind of keep up. I got incredibly excited recently. Series 17, you know, episode 2 or something. They actually mentioned stable isotope analysis, which is a way of finding out through the hair where someone has been. And I mean, they just dropped it into the conversation. Of course, they didn't mention they probably wouldn't be doing it in those circumstances, but I just kind of like the way they do try to keep up.
Yeah, with the science.
And it seemed a little bit less unrealistic than CSI, which I also can't watch.
I've never watched CSI. Yeah, they're too pretty for me. Right, and so I can't watch?
Yeah, I can't watch. I mean, look, in fact, with me it's not always a love-hate thing. I actually quite enjoy sitting on the couch watching CSI and then saying things like, oh yes, a dental, you know, a bite mark on the skin, it's like a fingerprint. I'm going, no, it's not. And then I'm thinking of watching, you know, Janet King or Crownies, favourite occupation, sitting on that with my daughter who's a law student going, no, you can't discuss that evidence in front of the jury. No. You know what I mean? It's quite an exercise. You kind of enjoy, you kind of understand in a TV show, yes, they have to lead the accused out through the front door of the court so they can have the encounter with the victim's family, even though you know it doesn't happen in real life. And you know that the advisor will have said, that's not going to happen. And then the writers have gone, well, tough. We need to have it because we need to have the emotion. Exactly. So I kind of understand that. So
anyone's really slick. I remember watching, I think it was maybe one of the early underbellies or something, and it was, you know, some scumbag was in the dock and the psychologist is on the stand saying, I've diagnosed an antisocial personality, and the guy calls out, I'm bloody social, I have mates over for a barbie all the time. That's probably more what it's really not.
That show Fat Tony, Christine Nixon appears in that. She's in the corridor wearing her hat. I'm thinking, no! They're wearing a hat indoors, but they was got the hat on the show.
She would have had hair all the time. So you heard it first here, folks. Everything you see on TV isn't true. Okay, so thanks, Liz. I watch revenge. I don't even watch crime shows. Anything with a bit of, you know, revenge and... Anyway, that's my issue. And so last but certainly not least, we have Superintendent Tess Walsh. Tess is the manager of the Serious Crime Division, which includes the Homicide Squad, the Missing Persons Unit, Armed Crime Task Force, if I get any of these wrong, and Arsons and Explosives Squad. All at once, Tess, or just a bit of... Okay. Her career highlights include investigative duties at the local criminal investigation units, or the old CIBs as they used to be called when I was writing crime, along with the rape and homicide squads, and you enjoyed most the opportunity to manage the county and Supreme Court trials. So you're our real expert, and Liz and I just storytellers.
I think they're a whole lot more funny than I will be.
Okay, so Tess, favourite crime author?
I think I put it down Alexander McCall, because that's the only fun crime writing that you read, so that the only stuff that I can stomach is the ones that take the mickey out of the detectives, and probably a few more that do that I haven't read, but yeah, so I just love that whole number one series. It's great.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. And I think it's funny, Mullen does the same in her crime that's set in the 1950s South Africa. Instead of having that forensics, she has invented this Zulu character called Shabalala, who provides, I realised in one scene where they found a body, and the detective, Emmanuel Cooper, is saying, oh, I wonder what happened here. And Shabalala is kind of a tracker, and he says, oh, boss, there were 3 offenders, one had a limp, and 4 hours ago, and they left that away. And I thought, she's just kind of put Shabalala in to, as the kind of forensic, he provides all this information without having to send that to the lab. Should I send Shabalala to the lab? I don't know. Okay, favourite TV show?
Probably Offspring or something like that.
No,
I miss Patrick.
No, that's a really hit and run because the guy stopped, didn't he?
What's that?
Well, when Patrick.
Oh, yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Don't compliment there. Don't compliment to TV. I work all day in the crime thing, so I get home and watch it. And then if you get home in time to watch the news, and the first 15 minutes of it, and it's a disaster in my head. And the last thing I want to do is keep watching it. So I flick it off and find something romantic or funny.
Too much Avengers.
One of the Mighty Pies are playing, and I'll probably.
I need to get a team and go to that football, don't I? So you can't watch any. You don't watch it like how I watched Summer Heights High, so that Mr. G, and I watched it so that I could pick out teachers that I worked with to go, oh my God, that's Mr. G. And also to pick, we all have great fun picking out this year's Jonah. Yeah, Jonah. Yeah.
Edgy, that stuff.
So you don't watch it to go,
I don't. As far as I went, I'm not sure whether you saw during the week that we opened a new forensics facility, and there's an air shower, and the minister and some of our higher-ranking police officers were stuck in the air shower together. It's quite funny, and it was very awkward, all these big And then Carl Kent, who is our head of forensics at the moment, is a terrific fellow, was interviewed on the fantastic new facility, and they said, and they actually asked the question, what about the CSI effect? And he said, well, yeah, they don't do us any justice because they have to solve all their crimes in 50 minutes, and they look really good while they do it.
So clearly they don't have air shower hair.
I'm with you on the hat hair too, very bad.
Yeah, we know that. Sorry, there's someone here in a hat. I feel really bad now. So our panel today is about what is the CSI effect, and I googled, and Wikipedia, my favourite site, says that the CSI effect is in the way that hugely popular CSI shows. CSI and its spin-offs, I think it's CSI Miami, CSI. I interviewed some guys in Wollongong, some crime scene examiners, and they wanted to have CSI Wollongong. No, seriously. Because Wollongong has some really weird crimes. I don't think Hollywood has jumped at that idea yet, but maybe they didn't get my emails. It's how this is portrayed on shows like CSI. I guess the flow-on effect from that is when you, particularly as a police officer, go to a crime scene, not only do they expect you to have, the CSI skills, but they would expect you to look. Does there ever look like?
I do my best.
Look like that girl on CSI.
I do have to look like the usual detective because I'm not a 6'4" bloke.
Or I bet it's Bristol or something like that. I don't watch it. But I have seen the ads, and they do look, they look very Hollywood with that sort of curly hair, and well, you've got that Shelley. I suppose you just had that because of CSI. But also the deeper part of this is that juries expect, and I read some fantastic quotes. That jurors in America, they're not as smart as us. I'm sorry to any Americans in the audience, they're not. There was a juror in America that kind of took the judge's side or sent a message to the judge saying, you know, that they didn't fingerprint the lawn. I'm concerned about that. You know, so it's, you know, dumbass, things like that. So that notion of juries thinking that they're much smarter, like teachers, thinking they're much smarter than what they actually are. Let's just go through the panel. Do CSI viewers get a distorted view of the world? We'll start with Shelley.
I think so, yes. And I would think the first or most prominent distortion is the time factor, because everything's done instantly. And we all know that things are not done, in fact, instantly. A very simple, basic test can take anything up to 6 weeks. And once you start talking complicated tests, much, much longer, you're talking months. And so you can see a juror sitting there saying, how come they took so long to do this, and you know, did they muck it up, or what was the problem? And whereas it's just purely, it takes that long. And I think that's, for me, the major distortion.
Yeah, and I suppose there's a plot in TV. Send this to the lab and then you'll get the results in 6 weeks. It's kind of loose. Yeah. We'll have the results by next Christmas. Okay, so Liz, what do you think is the main...
Well, it's that, and it's that it's in fact that the forensics are important in the actual conviction. In about 99% of cases, the forensic work is still done, but it's actually done to confirm what the police already suspect, to confirm what if the perpetrator has confessed, to confirm that what he or she said actually happened. And in fact, so it doesn't, in fact, somebody like me doesn't make a very good story. So in fact, all the stories in my books are the 1% or the 0.01% of the cases where the forensics actually solves the case. So that, and the key thing with the CSI effect, as you've alluded to, with jurors get very restless when there is no good forensic evidence presented, to the extent, and it's not just the US, I'm afraid. Now, Judge Tony Howard, who you know from the county court, was saying to me the other day that he actually had a juror who was kind of, you know, really unhappy as the prosecution wound up its case, and he ended up actually putting his hand up and saying, "Where's the DNA?" and the judge said, "Well,
was he American?"
and the judge said, "What did I tell you at the beginning of the trial? You only listen to what is presented here. You make your judgment on that." But everyone can be actually enslaved to the magic of DNA, and as there's a case that probably most of us would know about. There was a young man called Farah Jama, a young Sudanese, then teenager, who was actually jailed for 18 months for a crime. Not only did he not commit it for a rape, not only did did he not commit this rape, the rape actually didn't happen. And there was a contamination, and not at the lab either, but at the point of collection at a hospital. But everybody in the trial was actually transfixed by this DNA evidence, even though there was no evidence. This was a young black man who was supposedly at an over-28s venue in Doncaster, which everyone knows an over-28s venue is actually where over-45s go, and full of white middle-class people, and he's a Sudanese teenager. Nobody had seen him, he wasn't on the CCTV. The actual circumstances of the crime were impossible in that how could he have got a rather heavy middle-aged woman, or how could he have actually raped her in a cubicle, escaped with leaving no fingerprints, left the place not being seen, yet with the DNA, everybody was, including the judge, because probably if the judge had been possibly more on alert, might have said there's something wrong here, and he was convicted. So it's actually very hard.
And that case was where a woman had combined medication and a lot of alcohol and had woken up after having passed out in the toilet cubicle. I think her pants might have been undone.
That's
she
right.
thought she must have been drugged and sexually assaulted. And so she had no memory of it happening, and as it turned out, quite possibly she was just going to the loo and she passed out.
But it's an old-fashioned kind of Sherlock Holmes type. In fact, the one person who raised some doubts was in fact the cop. She
surprised us.
And she asked had there been a contamination of the lab. But they only looked at the police end, and nobody told the Institute of Forensic Medicine, who was in charge of the actual collection. If they'd been told that there was a query, they actually would have investigated. And so that's how it happened. And it's so tragic because this young man, was in jail for 18 months.
Well, yeah, that's, but I mean, another statistic that sorry to get too maxy on you, but I found another statistic about, and this is again in America, 22% of jurors, this was a juror poll in America, 22% expected to hear DNA evidence, regardless of the circumstances. And my favourite one was this. 32% of jurors expected to see ballistics or other firearms laboratory evidence in every criminal case, regardless of whether it involved a gun. You didn't believe me before, did you? Tess, is that?
I'm not sure I go with that.
Well, that's in America.
Yeah, forensics is such a broad spectrum of things. It does include all manner of things, from handwriting samples to guns to DNA. I don't know whether you're an unusual group, but you probably sit through trials and things like that in your spare time. I don't know. I know when I retire I will, because I just love court. I just think that's such an interesting part of it all. But I don't know whether any of you have seen a jury charged on DNA. It's one of the most painful things that you could possibly imagine. So a jury of 12 people like you and I, and probably, well, actually not like you and I, you've got a really genuine interest in crimes and this side of things, but these are people, and you have to talk. We encourage the barristers to speak to the least intelligent person on the jury, so everybody understands it. And it's a really difficult scientific concept to understand DNA. Shelley will explain a whole lot more than I can, but watching people try and grasp that when it's not just, Billy Bloggs has put his hand there and that's the murder weapon, so that's the end of that. It's Billy Bloggs and 16 other people might have put their hand there and their DNA might be mixed and it might be matched and it might be partially female and it might be a whole range of other things. So the complexities around that when it comes to the jury decision are really, really broad. And it's just not as simple as I've touched that, and that makes me responsible. Although, we've won a significant amount of cases specifically on DNA, and one in particular I'll talk to you later if you like.
Given that part of our topic is, how does crime fiction and TV get it wrong, I was just interested if any of you have got your favourite faux pas, your favourite, oh my God, moment in fiction or TV where they've just, the writer or TV writers have just done something really doofusy.
I have a favourite, which is of course the CSI. Surprise. But this was the fascinating thing, was the very first episode of CSI, one of the advisors was a well-known entomologist called Goff, he's an American, and he's written a fascinating book called A Fly for the Prosecution. And he was the advisor on the first CSI series, and Gus Grissom is actually, who's the, I don't know if anyone else is a fan here, but he's both, as you are in fiction but never in real life, he is both, well actually, he's both a forensic entomologist, but he also dabbles in everything else. He always sort of pops into the mortuary to check that the forensic pathologist is doing it right.
I bet you'd love it if that happened to you.
Actually, our forensic entomologist in Victoria is a
I
forensic
think
pathologist.
about Nellie Martin. She's an exception.
So she could butt in on
She
you.
could, but she wouldn't. That's very unusual. But yeah, anyway, one of his cases, one of Goff's cases, was used in one of his CSI episodes. And as people here may or may not know, probably do know, if you're crime fans, that when a dead body is left out in the open. It's colonised in first by flies which lay their eggs, and there are maggots, all the rest of it, which is a bit icky. And so in this CSI episode, which was based on the real life case, they actually didn't have flies, they had wasps coming. They had beetles being collected, nice clean wasps, nice little beetles. Because clearly the writers hadn't been happy with the idea of maggots and buzzy blowflies. So why? Yes, that's right, exactly. But the case of the advisor not being exactly being listened to.
And so did you jump up and go, they should be maggots?
Something like that, yes.
I hope you were out at a pub or
I
something.
know, the of actually getting to write it in my introduction notebook, so there's some satisfaction to be gained.
Yeah, good writer's revenge. Tess, can you think of a faux pas that you've...
Indeed, many. Not my own, of course, but there's a show, you'll be able to help me out, there's a show, it's a Criminal Profile, it's an American show where they
Criminal Minds.
Criminal Minds, maybe?
Oh,
Okay, so they sit there and they have this dastardly crime, and their war room is electronic walls, and so they say, okay, the offenders are male, and they put it in the computer, and then they say he went to school here, and it was the next list, and his mother was a horse breaker in her up, and up comes the list. And by the end of it, they've down to 7 suspects, and that's where they go, well, good luck with those.
I actually tried to write a book about a profiler, and I found that there are those expectations in the end, which, when I know that that's not what they do, but you know that if you're going to write a book about that, it's just not satisfying to have her come in at the end when the cops are saying, oh, we've really got a problem here, do you think it might be this person or that person? And she was very helpful when they had a few suspects working out which one it was, and that was good work.
I want the computer to give you
Yes, you need that, because otherwise it's just not interesting enough. That's the problem of real life.
It's a bit like sending your husband out shopping when you forget to tell him that you want chocolate, and then he gets home and you go, you should have known I wanted that. And, I think that I've interviewed a couple of profilers, and they sort of have a vague profile, and when they catch the guy, I meant him. That was who I was talking to. Yeah, thanks for that. It is, and I love in Criminal Minds that they speak they'll finish each other's sentences. They'll go, one will go, I think he's 25, and then the other one will go, and he's blonde. And they just kind of finish each other's sentences, which I think is a gift as well. Probably doesn't happen in real life. Shelley, could you come up with anything that was just like oh, for God's sake?
Well, I think it's perhaps a bit what Liz was referring to before, the multi-talented thing. The forensic pathologist is able to whip out and do a bit of forensic science as well. And perhaps give a bit of advice on all sorts of other areas. Again, this is science witness, where the female is actually, originally she started off as a forensic anthropologist, so that's nothing like a pathologist. She hasn't done medicine, and all of a sudden she morphs into a forensic pathologist. So yes, that I find a bit difficult to cope with.
Yeah, kind of overstepping the boundaries. We had a forensic scientist come and talk to Sisters in Crime a couple of weeks ago, Candace, and her specialty was something like fingerprints in blood and semen. That was it. And she might have done something. Paint. Sorry, Mum. Yes, so that's really Mum. So her field was very exacting, but certainly she wouldn't be looking at your Shelley to go, I don't think you've got that liver right.
Well, I hope she sticks to it.
Again, you understand why, I understand why this has to happen. Because if you're making a television series, if you are doing it realistically, there are 25 people would march onto the set. And in the book too, the reader will be like, who's this person? Who's this person? You have to, in order to make it bearable for the viewer or the reader, you have to simplify it. It doesn't make it any less annoying for those of us who actually know the truth, but it has to be done.
And you have to do that in true crime as well. Like, even though we're writing stuff that's fact, you have to pare it down. When I wrote the Frankston murders, I interviewed about 50 people for that book, but I still have people to this day coming up saying, oh, I was the one that got the sandwiches for lunch and you didn't put me in the book. There were hundreds of people. There were hundreds of people that were involved in that. And so what you have to do as a writer is you have to get the main ones, the good-looking ones, I suppose, to sort of really focus on those couple of people, because otherwise it just becomes too unwieldy.
Which is the annoying thing, I'm sure, for detectives a lot, when a journalist is telling the story, because they
always go to the good-looking one.
Exactly. Or the person who's the most talkative, or the person with the biggest ego is the one who wants to talk to the journalist. And suddenly it appears that that person has done everything. And sometimes the journalist will want to try and make out that it was a team effort, but often you'll have an editor who actually, come on, this is too complicated, Liz, let's get rid of all these, too many names. So, they'll take out names sometimes because they want to make it a simpler storyline to follow.
And I'm a trusting soul, and male cops, and you might disagree with me, Tess, can be a little bit catty. So I found this investigator, compare notes in front of all these people. Someone will be giving you their story, and then someone else will sidle up to you afterwards and go, yeah, we call him Lantern, because he doesn't hide his lantern under a bushel. And, then they'll suggest that he didn't solve the crime, that it was really that guy. And I've never heard that from females, but male police are a little bit bitchy.
Okay, not all. Look, there's in the big rough and tumble, there's a lot of ego, and once you cut through that and you get to the heart of why they're there, most of them are absolutely there for the victims of the community, and they're there for the right reasons, and that's the part a lot of people miss, and I'm sure it's been missed in the crime novels and the TV shows as well. Is that what I think is really beautiful about investigating is it's incredibly hard, it's incredibly complex, and it's slow and it's a slog. And when you solve something, it's just a glory. So that's not sexy enough to get into 50 minutes. So, but that's the reality. So yeah, whilst there's a bit of I think if you're looking at a predominantly male workforce, which our investigators are, we're trying to change that a little bit. There's a fair bit of ego there, but you can catch it.
It's great for writers too. My current book that I'm working on is on the dog squad, so I'm interviewing dog handlers. And so half of the dog handlers went, pick me, I want to do my story. And the other half went, no, I don't like talking about my work. But then I'd be sitting interviewing someone out of the squad, and someone else would walk past and went, I know I said no, but if he's giving a story... I'm a teacher, I work in, with 12-year-olds.
I'm not saying nothing.
I'm not finishing that sentence, but anyway. But it is good for writers because you want people to tell you their story. Now I'll throw this question out. Miss Marple never had forensics. She never sent anything off to the lab. She didn't have Shabalala to go that way. Do we now expect in crime fiction we have to have forensics now? Is that the trend? Shelley, I'll start with you. Do you think that if you read a crime book, are you expecting to be annoyed by the inaccuracies?
Well, that's why I love Midsummer, because there's none of that nasty forensic stuff.
How did they solve them? I've only watched it once when Mum made me.
They're very clever cops.
Oh, okay.
It just works down. So, it doesn't need all that
Miss Marple's is
messy laboratory.
Yeah.
So that's why I enjoy it so much. I don't like reading about all the forensic stuff. But I suspect that there are a lot of people out there who do, and maybe that is the way that fiction is heading, and obviously the TV shows too. Yes, that they expect to hear about DNA and all that sort of stuff and how useful it is, and of course it is, but I'm happy to continue to watch Midsummer.
It's funny, I'm not sure whether Robert got here yet, but we did a radio interview the other day, and he said, he was talking about 70s purposefully in the 1940s, where he didn't have to research forensics because he couldn't be bothered. So he just didn't want to go down that track. So if we all expect it today, you almost have to have the Phryne or the Robert Gott's character, set before forensics. Do you think we expect it?
Well, I think there's probably two streams, and that's why, because that recent television show, which I didn't really watch because I found it irritating, set in the 40s, 50s, about the police surgeon guy.
Dr. Blake.
Yes, set in Ballarat.
Show that's set in Ballarat.
Yes.
It's probably, all of these people are probably experts in that show.
There's things like that, or there's the Alex McCall Smith stream. People, if they don't like forensics, they'll read that, or So I think it's probably horses for courses. But I myself am still waiting for I like forensic scientists as actually heroes and heroines, and I think the problem with them, as far as the fiction writer is concerned, that the great virtues of the forensic scientist are things like doggedness and patience and persistence and obsessiveness can be, and they are not so sexy qualities to sell a television series or even a novel on, and that's the difficulty, because they're the things, the virtues that actually, and detectives have that as well, and they're the virtues that get crime solved, and the challenge is to actually put those onto the screen. I mean, in a way, in Matthew McConaughey in New Detectives, he's like that, and he's dangerously obsessive as well as being dangerously sexy. Maybe that's how they get around it.
Just a creep. Watch one episode. I don't know, he looks a bit skeletal. Speak to me. So you were feeling angry with Liz a minute ago because she doesn't like Dr. Blake. I just feel a bit sorry for her. It's balance, isn't it? Tess, do you think that we expect our crime fiction to have forensics?
Oh, I don't care what anybody expects. We're there to solve crimes. So, that's the expectation that you have of us, is that we get to the bottom of it, and however we do that, we do. The one on the weekend, dreadful murder of the lass in St Kilda Road, that would have been solved long before any forensic analysis was ever taken. So just fantastic police work and good community assistance and our colleagues in New South Wales and thank the Lord that person's apprehended. But so not a forensic test to be done on that. Obviously it will be supported through a trial if that's the way we go. But they're fantastic means of corroboration of putting the person somewhere, things like that. But if it's not needed, then
So good old-fashioned, detective work.
That's it.
You guys are solving the puzzle.
And the other thing is that the forensic services are finite, so we need to be really conservative about what sort of samples we collect and what sort of we meet in case conference with our forensic people about which pieces we think will get the most success from in terms of conducting specific tests. So we might seize 100 different pieces of exhibits from a crime scene, but test 3 of them. If you get the success that you want, then that's the only one. So but for others that are much more complex, if you tie up a biologist for all that period of time, then all the other cases go to the back of the file. So if you don't need forensics, we wouldn't use them.
So that's the reality, folks. So there's probably a lot of, oh.
Well, it'd be unusual to take a case to trial without any sort of analysis these days.
Yeah, yeah. I wrote a story a couple of years ago when they set up the crime desks, and they set up, and I went out to the academy and met the guys who were training, so fingerprint experts and crime scene examiners were training uniformed police to go out to house burglaries and car burglaries to lift fingerprints, not analyse them because that would be done at the fingerprint, the 5-year trained guys would be, and girls would be doing that, but to be able to collect that evidence, and they had the big cameras and the gloves and the crime desks in part, and they were incredibly successful, but were in part set up because people expected when something was, your sat-nav went missing from your car, that the team would be out with the big camera, and because of that CSI effect. And I did have a sat-nav stolen from my car, left it unlocked. I always do that. It's on my third sat-nav. And because I was running on the dog squad, my first thought when I noticed it was missing, like half an hour later after I'd driven off, which wouldn't have worked, but my first thought was, that sniffer dog would have just gone straight to it. But it probably wasn't a serious enough crime to call in the dog squad. But people do expect, that expectation. Have you noticed in detective work, Tess, where when you get to a scene, do people, the service that you're providing, do they expect the gruesome kind of entourage? It's not, good, the hairdos aside, and the talks, but, do you think that they're dusting for prints?
Look, there's a lot of expectations, and I think the expectation that we look fantastic after working a couple of days around the clock, and everyone's fresh and smelling fantastic and all that, the reality is gets pretty ugly. But at an actual scene, you've generally got it really well locked down, and so there's no, you've got media miles away, and so you should have. So the idea is to give the investigators and any sort of analyst that goes into that crime scene an absolute full run of it, because you only get that crime scene once, so once you pack it up you don't get it again. So the less pressure those people are under to do the proper analysis, the better.
Well, I went past it on the tram last weekend when that crime had been committed. Because I'm a sticky beat, I was sort of looking out the window of the tram because they'd announced that it wasn't going to stop at a couple of stops along St Kilda Road. And I was looking out and there was a big SES tent and there were cars everywhere, and I was trying to look, I thought, is it a fatal accident? I was looking out for the crash truck, and I'm so thinking that I'm an expert, but anyway. So I saw some guys in suits and I thought, this must be serious, and that's as far as I got. I couldn't deduce anything else. But when I came back from going into the city a couple of hours later, everything was still there. So, you start to think that there's something really, really awful has happened. But again, that level of service that came in, and the tents and the cameras, and I guess that's looking like a CSI show.
I guess so, and for a case of that nature, that was a dreadful murder in the middle of St Kilda Road, so that gets the top end of everything we can throw at that. That's an absolute must solve in the first instance. We have other murders that don't require such a response, and that's where somebody goes into a police station and says, I've just murdered my wife and she's at this address. So they're much more discreet sort of crime scenes, so you don't need the tents and that sort of thing. As soon as the media are on your toe, you sort of need some sort of boundary around that. But for murders, obviously we throw in the we can.
It's very impressive.
Yeah.
The fact that you solved it you solved it so quickly means that putting that level of attention
it's really funny from a community point of view. I can never given this kind of thought about what it all looked like, but that's I guess the more tents you put up, the more impressive it looks.
I was very impressed. The tents were gorgeous.
Never really thought about it.
Right, just some public feedback there, Tess.
I was all my detectives look gorgeous.
Well, they had nicely pressed suits. I'm married, so I don't look at other men. Now, Liz, one of your topics that you like to And I really like the way that you wrote the beautiful lies that the fiction writer has to tell their audience. Can you talk about the beautiful lies?
Well,
I'm so stealing that for book title.
Yes, well, the beautiful lies are many and entirely understandable. I mean, the first one is number of suspects. No, person, that's right, exactly. Yeah, person. I think in the Cherie Beasley case, which you may remember, very sad little case in the early 90s, a little girl who went missing and was later murdered. There were apparently more than 200 persons of interest for that, and they all had to be worked through, either eliminated or implicated. There was a famous rape in she might have worked on it, Christopher Clarence Hill, 1993. More than 100, and he was operating in the inner northern suburbs, and huge panic, understandably, of women in that area. And there were more than 100 persons of interest, and at that point DNA was in its earlier stages, so you were having lots of inconclusive testing, so people weren't being eliminated in the same way. So that's in a book, of course, so as not to drive the reader nuts, or on the TV show you've got maybe 3. You can't even probably have 7. You've got to have maybe 3 suspects. So that's
You're going to have 3 and like 2 are red herrings.
Yes, that's right.
And, you know, I told you it was him, and it couldn't have been me. It was at the opera, and then you go, damn.
Yes. That's a beautiful lie, number 1. Beautiful lie number 2 is probably the characters of some of the scientists or detectives. And again, my favourite, because one of my favourite personality traits in other people is that incredible patience and dedication and obsessiveness, which probably doesn't read well on the page, but you have to be like that, And again, the length of time that things take, the fact that crimes don't always get solved, which is one of the beautiful things about that book. David Simon, who wrote The Wire, his book Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets, which I recommend to anybody. But there's one major crime in that the detectives drive themselves mad about over 7 years. It's never solved. They never get it. And that happens. And you'd have colleagues, who they have, often they reckon they know who it is and they just can't prove it. But just the fact that there's a solution. And there's one novel I can think of by Susan Hill, who's actually one of my faves, which was so shocking because there was no solution. Somebody who was killing young children from memory, he or she was never found. So that's another beautiful lie to keep the reader happy.
And sometimes running true crime, Shelley and I were having a chat before. My first book was the Phillip Island murder, and when I went to, there was sort of a conclusion in the case that people weren't really happy with. It wasn't a satisfying conclusion. There was still a missing person. And when I went to the publisher and he said, "Oh look, it's a great yarn, but I'm worried that it doesn't have a strong conclusion." And but in fact, it's turned out to be. People still contact me about that book, and that came out in '93. I wrote it when I was 5. But because it allowed the reader to play armchair detective. And I get these people that have, graphs and charts and I think the timeline, because it didn't give a conclusion. So it turned out the publisher was wrong. That's never happened before. And it did give people. Shelley, in your area of forensics, did you ever feel that the CSI effect put more pressure on you?
Possibly giving evidence in court, yes, for all the reasons that we've spoken about and the effects on jurors and things. But actual work, no, I don't think it did at all. We do what we have to do and do whatever it takes, as Tess said. But I think you do look at your report before you go to court and think, I wonder how this is going to come across.
Have you ever had, we talked before about jurors kind of biting in going, fingerprint the lawn. Have you ever had any kind of reactions like that, or from
jurors, just from barristers?
Do tell.
So there's another thing that also never comes out in drama series, which is I think kind of alluded to before, the things that people can say in front of juries, and things like what the experts can or can't say, and the rules of expert evidence, which sometimes forbid you, and that's what I'm going to ask Shelley about this. There's a case of hers that's in one of these books. Terrible, terrible case where a man has actually, he's murdered his de facto's baby or toddler by spraying her with scalding hot water because he's angry with her. And Shelley, you had the evidence for that, but you couldn't actually answer the key questions in court because
We have this ritual called the voir dire, which takes place with the jury out of the courtroom, and the judge says to the barrister and the witness, tell me what you're going to say or what you're going to ask, and so that happens, and then the judge decides whether that will be allowed or not to be presented to the jury. And in this particular case, some of the evidence pertaining to the case wasn't allowed to be presented to the jury.
And so the key thing that you'd expect in a drama, and often happens in a drama, is the Rule 5 is of the rules of expert evidence. You cannot, the expert can only talk about their expertise. They're not allowed to answer the key question on which hangs the jury's desire to convict, as in, could these injuries, in that case, have been inflicted accidentally or on purpose? And you knew kind of with what you looked at, you knew the answer to that question, but because that was against the rules of expert evidence, you weren't allowed to actually answer that question, and neither was one of the key doctors at the...
That's right. The child suffered burns, and neither myself nor a burns expert treating burns in the hospital were allowed to give that evidence.
It's called the ultimate issue rule. So the ultimate issue, did this monstrous man, did he actually take a defenceless child and spray her with boiling hot water? Because if he did, then he's guilty and he'll go to jail. But that's the ultimate issue, and because the expert is not allowed to comment on that ultimate issue.
We couldn't say it couldn't have been an accident, because if it couldn't have been an accident, it must have been him.
Wouldn't it make great TV? Wouldn't it make great drama?
I'm very susceptible to what's on TV. I believe everything. And, I love The Good Wife, and they were very dramatic. And I was on a jury once, and that was just, when you talk about people wanting from the jury to ask barristers questions, I wanted to ask, why are you so boring? Seriously, on TV, there's a bit of theatre about it. And these guys, it's like monotone, seriously? I'm here for a bit of a show. And you're not holding up your end of the bargain. And what's with the weird wig? Perfectly good hair underneath. I can understand why you put a sheep on his head. But, I think that, so, and that was really, really boring. And, but what really disturbed me about being on the jury is, firstly, they elected me foreperson. They obviously looked at me and went, you look the smartest. And then it was a sexual assault case. I can talk about it because it didn't, we got, what's that thing? It didn't, they stopped it. No. Yeah, I don't know what it's called. And I was the foreperson. But when we went out into the little jury room, one of the jurors came up and said, they're talking about sex, and I can't, there are men in the room, I can't talk about sex. So I did my primary teacher voice. Well, if you've got something to say, just whisper in my ear and I can tell the group. But I didn't feel that when we were deciding to put someone in jail, that was, a good thing. Anyway, that's my issue. So luckily it got thrown out, because when they said, because I was actually writing a book on with the Child Exploitation Squad at the time, but you have to go in there and they say, what's your profession? And I went, primary teacher, because writing doesn't pay. But I did the paid job, and they went, yeah, you'd probably be stupid. And so I got put on the jury. And so when they said, it's a scoutmaster, sexual assault, I kind of went guilty, and we haven't started yet. Anyway, so my face is probably on the board, so on that magic board that I have. But Tess, you've got a case, the case in Bendigo that we were emailing about, not on the magic computer, that DNA spectacularly succeeded. Do you want to talk a little bit about the little Zayden Witten?
Yeah, I will. Well, it's the trial is just completed, and the sentence is just, it was only May, I think, or June. Not too far away from here, just a little town over in Bendigo. So a really tragic case, the death of a 10-month-old child in his cot at home. Most of you will be vaguely familiar with those circumstances. So the offender is a 21-year-old male, Harley Hicks, who was a really tragic young man, had a tragic life and lots of disadvantage and lots of trauma in his life. He was living at the time with his stepbrother and his partner, and they'd consumed some alcohol and drugs that afternoon. Harley was an escalating criminal. He had a range of prior convictions dating back probably to his early teens, and he was certainly escalating in violence, and his crime before this one that he was convicted of was an armed robbery where he was somewhat violent. So he and his stepbrother consumed some drugs, one of which was methamphetamine, or commonly known as ice, which is becoming such a significant issue for us, and really seeing the homicide rate increase, and we think there's a direct correlation between ice and the use of ice in young people and homicides. So Harley left the home at in the early hours, probably about 11 o'clock, and committed somewhere in the vicinity of 11 burglaries. And he had committed those burglaries rifling through cars and essentially trying back doors and windows and things like that. Note to self, if you don't lock your doors, please do, because lots of people don't. And anyway, he had stolen a range of different items from different places, and then he got to this one address and where the baby's family lived. Mum and dad of this of Zayden were not together, but both co-parenting and doing so really successfully, and they're also parents of another 3-year-old boy who's Zayden's older brother. So Harley, when he went out that night, took a bag of a kit bag, probably a breaker's kit, but he also took a very heavy baton, reason only known to him. And he had one of the burglaries he committed, he was interrupted by an adult male who chased him away. So Harley, in his wisdom, decided not to use the baton on that occasion and took off, ran away. However, when he went to the house in question where Zayden was asleep, he went through each of the rooms. He stole some scales, a pair of sunglasses and $2,000 from a wallet, at which stage he's gone into Zayden's room. And for reasons he's never given a proper account, but for reasons unknown to anyone, and the judge makes comment that you may well have killed the baby because the baby woke and you were endeavouring not to get caught, or another reason for which you just killed the baby for reasons that are inexplicable. So he, I won't go too far into it, other than he repeatedly beat that baby with a very heavy baton, and the injuries to the child were significant and fatal. But not only that, the forensics indicated that the baton had been used to hit the baby on the head and the upper body, but also in a different format. The baby had sort of been belted with the baton in a bludgeon sort of way. Anyway, he left the house and left the mother to wake up at 6:30 in the morning and the baby brother and find that the baby was dead. So the investigation commenced, and a range of young people from the area were suspects, one of which was Harley. Harley was interviewed at length and had showed not the slightest bit of indication that he was responsible. Following the brutal murder of Zayden, he had gone to a mate's place, eaten a sausage roll, had a bit of a drive around, and then went home and had a few more drugs. The following day he went to bed, slept well, got up, showed his brother the booty that he had stolen the night before, and just went about his daily business, so quite extraordinary. He was interviewed shortly thereafter by the police and was quite clever in his inference that another local lad had been out doing burglaries that night, and he was probably the one they were looking for because he was known to carry a weapon and what have you. So he literally implicated this other quite vulnerable young fella. So the police wandered around and raided that young fella's home, and after inquiries, he had a rock-solid alibi, so we dusted him off and said sorry about that young fella, as we do. So we ended up back with Harley and interviewed Harley for the crime of killing Zayden and committing all those burglaries, and instead of showing any sort of remorse or sorrow, he actually threw off on his brother and said it was probably him, but not only his brother, his twin brother. So he wanted us to believe that was him. Inquiries went from there, and the trial was contested on many facets. One of the things we did was search Harley's home and found that baton and a range of other things. One of the things that he'd stolen from a separate house earlier that night, and we're not quite sure how it happened, but had both Zayden and I'm not quite sure, it was one of those Xbox things, and he had it set up in his lounge room at home, but it had both the deceased Zayden and Harley's DNA on it. We also seized the baton, and they were able to match the baton, the deceased's DNA on the baton as well as Harley's, but further than that, with the expertise of the pathologist, they were able to match the injuries. The baton had a copper coil around it, and they were actually able to match the injuries to the child to that baton, which was in his kit bag. So directly forensically solved. Would the jury have had convicted without that? I don't know. That's some pretty fantastic evidence to go to trial with, and the judge made a range of very strong comments, but indicated that he thought the jury had made a really sound decision given all of the evidence that was before them.
And the identical twin was never in the picture.
Never.
That would have been possible.
Potentially, yeah.
It's probably not being a path to visit his brother.
Yeah.
So I guess what we've seen cases where in real life, DNA can be used for good and for not so good.
It's fantastic, and they're the kind of cases that you do when you write a book about successful forensic cases. They're the ones you choose. They're the real fantastic ones.
And it was interesting because I was going to close with the question before we take questions from the audience. Just close with the question. This was in my googling that in one article said that CSI make better crooks because the crooks are watching. I haven't found that because I reckon crooks are pretty stupid. And some leave wallets at the scene. Some don't even they don't even wear gloves. So they just leave their fingerprints behind. Tess, have you found that the dumbass crook? But clearly because of the case that you just talked about, he left a trail of forensic evidence. Have you found that crooks are getting smarter, or are they still just as silly as they always were? Well, they'd have real jobs if they were smart, wouldn't they? Sorry, a generalisation.
Look, our soul rate's not getting any worse, so either we're getting smarter commensurately with them. I'd like to think that. Look, I think we've got technology on our side, so as the advances in technology assist us, probably more than the offenders. So yeah, you couldn't help get savvy to some of it. I mean, we have a lot of burglars and things wear gloves and things these days, but just got to bring in the neighbourhood watchers and they'll help you solve.
And there are cases where they've then taken off their gloves at the scene and fingerprints have been lifted from inside the gloves.
Well, they leave the gloves behind, you get the DNA in the gloves.
Yeah.
No, seriously, a lot of people wear beanies and then they'll leave it behind with the hair in it. Crooks are quite... we rely on it.
that smart, do I? And one of the sayings in IT was just when you make something idiot-proof, idiots get smarter. And I guess that they have to think about that. I guess you know, in crime, that the same thing, that you know, that you still get these kind of clue trails.
Also, people are very, well, often extremely upset or emotional when they are committing crimes, so then that's when the forensic savvy might go out the window.
Yeah. And also, like in fiction, the crooks are so smart that that they can eradicate every single molecule of forensic evidence, which I wrote, when Shelley and I first met, we contributed a story to an anthology that Kerry Greenwood had put together, and my story was called Serial Killers Are Losers, because they're usually just a social misfit who had no mates and kills and gets caught fairly quickly, and has dubious, you know, body hygiene. And they certainly aren't the kind of Hannibal Lecter, you know, super smart people. Shelley, have you got a closing comment on idiot proofing? Or?
Only that I can think of several examples of criminals being so dumb.
Can you share those with us, Shelley?
Well, one, for example, sticks in my mind. I think they were either work acquaintances or might have even been friends, but anyway, one had upset the other one, so he killed him. And then he thought, hang on, I'm going to hide the body. Okay. So it was in a country area that had a number of mines, and thought, I know, I'll bung him down the mine, no one will be able to find you there, that's fine. So did that, went for a bit of a walk and thought, I've been watching those TV shows. There's something called forensic evidence and yeah, look, I think I'll go and I'll get his body again and I'll chop off his hands and his head, and that way no one will know who it is, even if they find the body. So this was actually extraordinarily difficult to get down the mine. Chopped off the hands and the head and climbed his way back up out of the mine somehow. Buried the hands in the head some distance away or something, and then went down to the pub to have a drink because he was so tired after all this effort. And this is the sort of first example. So had a few drinks and then started telling all his mates what he'd just done. But no, it gets worse. So now the police have been alerted by the mates in the pub that this has probably taken place and there's a body down that mine. So the investigation begins and the body's brought up to the surface and the police search. And there's his wallet with his ID and everything. No hands.
My favourite dumbass one was I wrote a story about an armed robbery, and which isn't normally funny. This one was hilarious. And the guys had done an armed robbery, sort of young idiots, and the teller had slipped a dye bomb into the bag. And so this dye bomb had exploded in the car, and when the police followed the trail of blue dye pretty much from the bank to their house and knocked on the door, only to be met by two men who looked like Smurfs. Hilarious mugshots. The avatar, like that. We're going to throw it open to the floor. I know we could talk forever, couldn't we, girls? But we'll throw it open to the floor.
Very quick.
10 minutes for questions. The lady there.
Okay, at the moment Brian Brown and Sam Neill are rocking around the ABC on Old School. I don't know if you've seen it or not. it's a situation that's got the old cop, the old crim, it's got fraud, it's got Asian games, it's got bikies, it's got quite a lot of other different groups, and it's still going. And every day we tend to meet another mob. In real life, do the cases come out with so many different irons in the fire? And have you seen Old School, and what do you think of the writing?
I was too busy watching Revenge.
I've seen it, I like it.
You like it?
Is it a TV show?
Yeah.
But not filmed in Ballarat.
So do you get so many different groups coming in on one crime, really?
What, do bikies and gangsters unite? Tess, do they? Do they form a brotherhood and have a special handshake?
Really, unfortunately, there's a serious so, it's all lots of fun, but there's a serious answer to that, and that's that our organised criminal enterprises are becoming very sophisticated and very far-reaching. They're no longer the banditos of Ballarat or wherever they might be. They have international reach, and we're finding that we've got very sophisticated money laundering techniques that where criminal enterprises that they'll filter their money offshore and things like that. So yes, we have the organised crime syndicates that we have at the moment recruit from all sorts of different groups, and we're seeing some merging. You'll see some shift into the building industry at the moment and things like that. So their enterprises are forever growing, and it's quite a significant worry for us. We've just to that end, we've just sort of aligned some of our crime command work groups, and so we've got a gangs and guns and organised crime area that we're going to be focusing on those. But yes, there's certainly a strong trend at the moment for organised crime groups to be recruiting from other sectors coming together.
And the other day I interviewed a drug dog handler. The dog is not on drugs, it gets tested or something, but he was saying that one of the problems that he's finding now is that bikie gangs will move into small towns, so Ballarat, watch out. I saw two bikies at the Bridgewood Bakery having breakfast this morning. They didn't look like gangsters, and just thought I'd throw that in. But what they'll do is they'll recruit local kids to give them free samples of ice, and of course it's so addictive that they then become addicted, and then they have to deal in order to support their habit. And so that infiltration of rural ice.
It's happening all over Victoria and much more broadly. And I can tell you, if you're the captain of a footy or netball club in a rural town, you need to be very aware of who you're associating with, because they're actually targeting leaders in the country towns, getting them hooked, and then they get the whole team hooked and they get to run the town. We've probably seen it in half a dozen towns already, and we don't want to come anywhere.
Any other questions?
Oh, we've got a couple of that hasn't very good statistical ones, but just that you said your sold rate stayed the same. What is the sold rate as a percentage? Did you feel it?
Across the board, we generally, it depends on the types of crime. Homicides are not very high, but most homicides are committed by people known to each other, so we have a really high rate there, which is not due to our fantastic detective work. Sometimes it is, often it's not. Volume crime is often quite low, it's probably in the 50s. That's all your theft from motor cars and things like that. But crimes against the person is actually quite high, so we have reasonable incidents. But again, a lot of it's where people know each other, so people are assaulting each other and things like that. So often they're...
Easy to find.
Yeah, well, that's right, yeah. Well, Billy hit me. Okay, Billy, there's your chance. We call that assault, but however crime comes to us, then it's up to us to solve it, no matter who's committed it. So yeah, it does vary depending on what sort of crime it is.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. In the real world, how long does it take for you to do a DNA test? So, like, if it could take 6 weeks, is that because there are other DNA tests in front of it?
Not directly my area, but yes, there's always a list and that has to be prioritised.
So if there was only one DNA test in Victoria that needed to be done, how long would that actually take in the real world?
Well, again, it depends how many confirmatory tests you're going to carry out and all the control tests that you have to do to ensure that your method is working and all those sorts of things. So I would think minimum several days.
No, actually, the VIFN, the unit on, they're looking on missing persons DNA test, they reckon they can do it. Absolute best case scenario is, in fact, 8 hours. I was 8 hours in 1 minute.
But that's when you've got a person-to-person sample.
Yes.
So, for instance, I had a murder where a sock was used overnight, and there were 8 people that bought the sock in the last few weeks. So, you know, exaggeration, but there were several. So, you never actually test. It's very rarely you're testing that blood sample against that blood sample. DNA is much more.
Is it just me, or is everyone else more horrified by sock than they are by the murder?
That washes good.
Julie's got one more question.
Yes.
Yep, just over in
What
the
does it
front row.
take to leave your DNA behind? What do you have to do? If I just had, would I be leaving my DNA on this chair here?
Yes.
Would it have to be hair or would it
Could be.
I mean, canvas?
No, they're sort of, that's dead tissue, which is not ideal. But living tissue, oils from the skin, those sorts of things can all leave cells that are viable, and DNA can be extracted from that. So just touching something, yes, is usually good enough.
Human DNA can now be extracted from the poo or vomit of a fly that has fed on biological material. So if a man cuts himself shaving and there's blood on the basin and a fly comes in and feeds on that, his full DNA profile.
The person that does that test.
So there's
Even on the first date, and someone goes, "So, what do you do?"
There's a particular woman who works at the Cloud Police Forensic Centre. She's been known to basically, dinner parties, dead, and then she basically say, "What do you do for what's your PhD on?" And she tells them fly poo and fly vomit.
I'd like to thank our